Okay, welcome back for example 4, law of cosines. If you've been with us for the first 3, you'll know that I went over the law of cosines, what it is, what the equation looks like, and we've done 3 examples where we had the situation where we were given 2 sides and an angle in between those 2 sides, and we needed to find the third side of the triangle. This time, we are actually given 3 sides of the triangle. We know it's not a right triangle, so we can't use the standard trig ratios to find the angle measure, but we can find an angle measure by using the law of cosines. So let's get started with that. First thing I want to do is remind you of what the law of cosines looks like. So the law of cosines looks like this equation. It says that if I have a squared, this is going to be equal to b squared plus c squared minus 2 times a times c times 2 times b times c times the cosine of angle A, right? So a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc times the cosine of A. Well, that's great if I'm trying to find a squared. Now, I can still use this to find A, okay? I can also rewrite the equation. So first I'm going to start with this equation. We're going to fill in the information we have. We're going to solve for that angle that is labeled x degrees. Then I'm going to show you a slightly different way that you could do it. So you have an option, and I want you to know that you have an option. You could memorize a separate formula, essentially, is what we're doing. So let's just fill this in. I'm going to use this as my angle A, and then the other 2, I'll just fill them in. So why did I do that? Because I wanted to identify what is my A, my side A, and then we have side B and side C. All right, so let's fill in our formula. So our formula then says that 8 squared is equal to 11 squared plus 10 squared, or 10 squared plus 11 squared. Remember, addition is commutative, so it doesn't matter which order I wrote it in. Minus 2 times 11 times 10 times the cosine of x. There's my angle A, right? That's my x. Okay. Now you'll note that we have some things going on here. Let's take a look at this. I've got my a squared, I've got my b squared and c squared, minus 2 times a and times b and times c times the cosine of angle A. Okay. Now I can simplify this, or I can just do some rearranging, and that's where I want to go with this. We're going to subtract 11 squared and 10 squared from both sides of the equation. So I have 8 squared minus 11 squared minus 10 squared. This is equal to negative 2 times the 11 times the 10 times the cosine of x. Now I'm just following order of operations and algebraic rules to simplify this, and basically I'm working to try and isolate the x. Now most students are going to start getting confused, so I want you to just take a breath, pause the video, and look at it for a minute before you start freaking out and getting really upset. I haven't simplified. You can simplify, but there's a reason I haven't done it yet, and I want you to see why. So I'm just going to keep it like this for a minute. Now the next thing I want to do, I'm still trying to isolate the cosine of x. Well, since this is negative 2 times 11 times 10 times the cosine of x, to isolate this, I'm simply going to divide by negative 2, 11, and 10. So what I get is 8 squared minus 11 squared minus 10 squared divided by negative 2 times 11 times 10. This is equal to the cosine of x. So what I've done here is essentially I've taken this original equation and I've rewritten it a little bit to say that I can have a squared minus b squared minus c squared divided by negative 2 times b times c, and this is equal to the cosine of angle A. So this is the formula that if you wanted to memorize this formula, it would help save you a couple of steps maybe along the way, because you don't have to do the subtraction and the division, like it's already in this formula. So it's up to you if you want to simplify and you want to memorize it, or if you want to start at the beginning, whichever works best for you. Right? Just remember that when you're trying to save time, memorizing something is helpful. Okay, so let's go back to the problem. We need to simplify. So I'm going to go on my calculator and I'm going to simplify 8 squared minus 11 squared minus 10 squared. Okay. So this gives me negative 157. So I have negative 157 divided by, now let's go ahead, negative 2 times 11, times 11 times 10, right? So this is negative 220. This is equal to the cosine of x. Now, if this is equal to the cosine of x, then x is equal to the inverse cosine of 157 divided by 220, and hopefully you guys notice I dropped the negatives because both the numerator and denominator have a negative. Negative divided by a negative is positive. And so now I can type this into my calculator. So my second cosine, to find the angle measure, remember you have to use the inverse. So I have the second cosine, that's my cosine inverse, or my inverse cosine, 157 divided by 220. Close my parentheses and enter, and I find out rounded to the nearest tenth, so I go to the 6 and the 100th place, round that 5, the 4 and the 10th place up to a 5. So this means that I have an angle that's approximately 44.5 degrees, right? I do know the units for the angles, so it is degrees. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Come back for example 5.